As the returning officer for the constituency of Hackney North and Stoke Newington, I hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election is as follows. Diane Julie Abbott,
Labour,
18,912.
My mother was there, my brother was there, and some of my closest friends had somehow blagged their way into the count. And it was just the most extraordinary moment because you knew you were making history.
And I declare that the said Diane Julie Abbott has been duly...
So a very good vote there for Labour. Diane Abbott becomes Britain's first black woman MP with a majority virtually unchanged over 1983.
When my victory was announced, I was both completely exhilarated, but also my mind was boggling because all through the campaign, people had told me that I couldn't win. Remember, I wasn't just black and female, I was young and radical. I had a head full of braids down to my waist. People, including black people and people on the left, had told me I couldn't win.
The British general election of 1987 saw the election to the House of Commons of 4 black members of Parliament. They were all MPs for the Labour Party. Diane Abbott was the only woman.
The result is also a triumph for the people of Hackney North and Stoke Newington, people of all colours, of all creeds, who came together to put Hackney in the history books tonight.
There'd never been a black woman MP before, so you really felt you had beaten fantastic odds.
And was it something that you always knew you wanted to do? Was becoming an MP something that had always been burning in you?
I've always been fascinated by politics and I've always wanted to make a difference. I can remember as quite a small child, my mother getting me ready to go to school and plaiting my hair, loads of thick curly hair. And I'd be listening to the 8 o'clock news and I'd be thinking to myself, you know, if I was Prime Minister, I would do this. You know, if I was Secretary General of the UN, I would do the other. So from a very early age, I wanted to change the world. I wanted to be involved in the political process.
Diane Abbott was born to first-generation immigrants from the Caribbean.
My family were working-class Jamaicans who came to this country in the 1950s. They both came from the same village in rural Jamaica and had left school at 14. Mummy was a nurse and Daddy worked in a factory. You know, they believed in education. They encouraged us to do well at school. But the idea that their daughter could become a Member of Parliament was way outside their expectations.
When it happened, what did it mean to her, do you think?
Well, you know, Mummy was there when they declared the result, and she also was in Parliament when I made my maiden speech. And I think for her in particular, but that generation of West Indians in general, the fact that a young woman of West Indian heritage could become a Member of Parliament was kind of a coming of age for the West Indian community. As a child, you would sit and listen to your parents and their friends chat, and they would always talk about going home. Many of them were going to die in the UK, but they always talked about home, going home. But when I got elected to Parliament, it was like, you know what? We are home, here to stay, here to fight.
Diane Abbott had gone from a girls' grammar school to Cambridge University and from there to the civil service. But it was her involvement in black activism that finally pushed her to stand for office, when she noticed that every MP she came across was white.
What we found as young black activists, everywhere we went, we were talking to these white MPs. So we started saying, why aren't there any MPs of colour in the Labour Party? And the Labour Party said, well, you know, we can't get the candidates. So we all said, we'll run. I went to various constituencies and lost rather badly. And then Hackney North came up, and I was a bit fed up by then. And I said to my secretary at the time, you know, I'm not going to bother with this because, do you know, I lost all these others. And my secretary, who's a lovely lady called Pat, said, I just have a feeling about Hackney North. But no one thought I could win, not least because there was a sitting Member of Parliament who wanted to run again. But I managed to get shortlisted, And I always remember the final selection meeting. It took place in Hackney Town Hall. There were over 100 people there. And I remember waiting to go in and make my speech. And along the corridors of the town hall were all these pictures of past mayors and past aldermen, and many of them were actually Jewish. And as I walked up and down besides these photographs and portraits, it's like I could hear them whispering to me, "You're going to do it. We came to this country from thousands of miles away, and we know you can do it." So buoyed up by the sense that the generations of migrants to Hackney were on my side, I went into the meeting and spoke. And I'll never forget, I went into the meeting, over 100 people, mostly having said beforehand that we're going to vote for the sitting MP. And the final lines of my speech was that poem by Maya Angelou, bearing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And that speech turned it.
Once selected to be Labour's candidate, much of the battle was won. Hackney was a stronghold for the party. Once elected to Parliament, she attracted a lot of media attention.
Hello. Hello, good evening and welcome to Question Time, the last of this season. And around the table with me, the Labour MP Diane Abbott, the first black woman to become a member of the UK Parliament. She's on the so-called hard left of the new Parliamentary Labour Party.
And how did the media treat you?
I was kind of deluged with media attention. But it wasn't all wholly positive, because a lot of the media was, she's a loony lefty, how has this happened? I remember whilst I was still a candidate, the Tories ran this campaign of the top 10 Labour loonies, okay, which were different left-wing Labour candidates. And I was number 8 in the top 10, and I think the Sun carried it. So, yeah, there was a lot of attention, but some of it was really quite hostile. People just could not get their heads around the idea that this young, radical black woman was a British Member of Parliament.
And what about your fellow politicians?
Well, I remember coming to Parliament for the very first time. There were the 4 of us. There was Bernie Grant, there was Paul Butang, there was me and Keith Vaz. And to be honest with you, other MPs, including other Labour MPs, regarded us with a degree of trepidation.
A lot has changed in the British Parliament since 1987, when Diane was elected. Then only 41 out of 650 MPs were women. Now there are 191 women MPs. There's also a fairer representation of black and ethnic minority MPs. Known as a left-wing maverick, Diane Abbott has spent most of her career on the back benches. Some say she's never held government office because she's too outspoken. So you've been an MP now for more than 25 years. What has it meant to you?
Do you know, I've got a friend who always says that if you're working class and you become a Member of Parliament, it's the job your parents always wanted for you. Clean, indoor work, no heavy lifting. Coming from where I come, it's still an extraordinary thing to have the privilege of being a Member of Parliament. I never forget that. Never forget that.
Diane Abbott remains one of the most high-profile black women in British politics and a popular local MP, having been re-elected to her constituency 7 times.